A shrewd investor, pioneering industrialist, and big-hearted philanthropist at the same time, how did this young American telegraph writer become one of the most successful industrial tycoons in history? I mean, in today's money, his fortune would amount to about $367 billion. That's $100 billion larger than the richest man's fortunes in the present, belonging to none other than Jeff Bezos. Well, if the same question is floating in your head too, then watch on, because in this video we shall take a brief look at his story and how he amassed his mountainous wealth. Born in the wild and windy corners of Scotland in 1835, Carnegie was the second son of handmill weaver and workingman's marcher William Carnegie. His mother, Margaret Carnegie, a little-known shoemaker at the time, was the daughter of a fiery campaigner and agitator for workers' causes, Thomas Morrison. His beginnings were humble, and trade unionist influences pervaded his family, including his very own father. But not long after he was born, Carnegie's father lost his source of income due to the arrival of the power loom, thereby snatching his job as a loom weaver. The entry of this new technology thrust the local town's economy into a gloomy downturn, forcing the Carnegie family to relocate to the United States in 1848 in search for a better life. Having jumped the Atlantic, they joined a colony of fellow Scottish migrants, a small settlement called Allegheny, in Pennsylvania, now part of Pittsburgh. There, Andrew didn't sit still, and at the young age of 12 took up a job as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory. After a long day at the factory, Andrew would attend night school, where he'd learn a bunch of useful skills to help him in his later career. By the age of 14, Andrew had successfully integrated into the American way of life, and left the cotton factory to become a messenger in the local telegraph office. There, he thrived, and continued working tirelessly until his talents were noticed by Railway Superintendent Thomas Scott. Thomas Scott saw a gifted young man in Andrew, and so swiftly employed him as his personal secretary and telegrapher. Within 6 short years, Andrew was ready to take the reins of his employer, and so he succeeded Scott as the superintendent of Pittsburgh's railroad division. From bobbin boy earning no more than $1.20 a week to novice teenage telegrapher, the ambitious Carnegie found himself as Pittsburgh's railway superintendent at the meager age of 24. From that point onwards, his rise was meteoric. Being a perspicacious analyst of America's growing industrial landscape, Carnegie began looking out for promising investment opportunities. He began to pour his cash into emerging companies like the Keystone Bridge Company, the Superior Rail Mill and Blast Furnaces, the Union Iron Mills, the Pittsburgh Locomotive Works, and even in the burgeoning oil sector. During his prime years, Carnegie invested in the Woodruff Company and arranged a merger for them with George Pullman, the inventor who conceptualized the sleeping car for long-distance train journeys. This investment proved to be a game-changer, leading to the widespread availability of first-class sleeper carriages to facilitate the lengthy train journeys across America's vast territorial plains and plateaus. At the same time, Andrew visited various steelworks in the United Kingdom. Touring the growing steel industry of Britain, he began to appreciate the growing importance of steel in the next generation of America's Industrial Revolution. Packaged in some of his trips were visits to his old hometown of Dunfermline in Scotland, where he sponsored the construction of libraries and hospitals. Upon returning to the US, he did not leave this insight untapped and immediately shifted his focus towards building America's steel industry. Leaving his position as superintendent in 1865, he took up the management of the Keystone Bridge Company. Interestingly, this move coincided with the outbreak of America's Civil War. Carnegie was amongst the young men drafted to serve the Union's armies. Not willing to leave his growing business to the bandits, Carnegie paid another man $850 to impersonate him and report on his behalf. He swiftly went back to business, which continued growing, largely unscathed by the Civil War. By 1872, under Andrew Carnegie's command, Keystone was ready to build its first steel plant. Within a year, he founded the J. Edgar Thomson Steel Works, which would eventually branch off to become the Carnegie Steel Company. Lo and behold, Carnegie's steel empire was born, and the rewards only multiplied from that point onwards. As Carnegie found himself in the driving seat of America's steel industry, he built new steel plants, incorporating the latest technologies that he picked up on his visits to Europe. Under the shadow of rapid technological innovation, steel production soared, and the price of manufacturing it hit a record low. As if that wasn't enough, Carnegie also adopted detailed cost and production accounting, increasing the efficiency of the company even further. By the 1890s, Carnegie opened the open hearth furnace into his steel plants, which further enhanced steel production. Gradually, he went on to purchase the entire supply chain of steel, acquiring the coke fields and iron ore deposits that fed the hungry steel machine, and then purchased the railroads and ships that transported the steel. Moreover, Carnegie was adept at headhunting some of the smartest people in the state to run his growing monopoly. Having gained control of the whole process from the beginning to the end, the Carnegie Steel Company became America's preeminent steel producer. By 1890, its steel production overtook Britain's steel production, outpacing the world's biggest steel Goliath of the time. Through thick and thin, the Carnegie Steel Company flourished, surviving multiple economic downturns, including workers' riots and violent industrial strikes against his plants. One such incident occurred in 1892, when workers in his Homestead plant protested wage cuts. In response, the plant's manager, Henry Clay Frick, whom Andrew had distantly vouched for, deployed 300 Pinkerton guards to protect the plant from the protesting workers, which led to violent clashes and killed at least 10 workers. Although Carnegie branded himself as the working man's champion, this incident tarnished that reputation he so gloriously held. Perhaps Carnegie had little choice, as the preordained forces of capital left him with no alternative than to cut wages in order to maintain his company's viability and competitiveness in a fast industrializing nation. However, the turn of the century arrived, and it duly hit 1900 in the calendar. The once dynamic Carnegie turned 65, having amassed a vast fortune under the auspices of his ever-growing steel behemoth. By then, his company was making $40 million every year in profits alone. From that point onwards, Carnegie began to step back from business and later sold off his company to J.P. Morgan, a rising banker at the time, for a gigantic price tag of $480 million. This sealed Carnegie's fate as America's richest, exceeding even the net worth of oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller for a brief moment. Having achieved the pinnacle of financial success, Carnegie's retirement career featured endless philanthropic engagements, activism, writing books, and traveling. In fact, Carnegie was far more than a business tycoon. Both during his industrial career and after, Carnegie was a fierce anti-imperialist, anti-royalist, and a passionate proponent of liberal democracy. Carnegie's energetic activism also led him to join the American Anti-Imperialist League in response to America's acquisition of the Philippines. There, he met former presidents like Grover Cleveland and the poet Mark Twain. In fact, the American takeover of Philippines infuriated him so strongly that he offered $20 million to the Filipino people so that they could buy back their independence from the United States, the same amount of cash that the US paid to its original colonizer, Spain. He didn't succeed, but nevertheless, his engagements in activism and writing continued, and he became a regular contributor to many magazines like the North American Review and the 19th Century. One book that Carnegie authored included Triumphant Democracy, where he made the case that America's Republican system of government was far superior to Britain's monarchical system. In fact, he did not mince his words in criticizing the British royal family. Becoming a fiery polemic in the UK and a popular hit in the US, it became a bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic. Later, in 1889, he published his premier wealth-making manual entitled Wealth, where he argued for the importance of charitable giving amongst those who reach a certain stature of wealth and riches. Aside from his immersion in social issues of his time, Carnegie pulled no strings in his charitable donations. He poured money into the creation of libraries, education centers, trust funds, and think tanks, including the world-renowned Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Carnegie wanted to use his wealth to fulfill his vision of a more educated, connected, and prosperous world. In fact, he considered it a moral duty to donate his wealth, or, as he once put it in scathing terms, a man who dies rich dies disgraced. In the years that followed, Carnegie founded a cluster of charitable trusts scattered across the United States and the British Empire, including his birthplace of Dunfermline. There, he poured cash into the development of Dunfermline schools and colleges, Further afield, in Scotland, Carnegie invested in the expansion of up to 4 universities. In the United Kingdom, from 1913 onwards, he also sponsored the construction of numerous libraries, theatres and child welfare centres through his Carnegie United Kingdom Trust. The largest of all Carnegie Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, was founded in 1911 in order to promote peace and understanding between different American peoples, later stretching to include Canada to the north. The same organization then funded multiple educational institutes and research ventures across the eastern seaboard. All in all, it is estimated that Carnegie's wealth funded the establishment of over 2,500 public libraries, which isn't as surprising when you consider Carnegie's undying enthusiasm for books and education. Named after him, the Carnegie Mellon University still exists today as a respected provider of education. Many churches owe their towering organs to Carnegie's funding too. His unending charitable sprees meant that he eventually gave away a whopping $350 million, which amounts to multiple billions in today's money. However, in his final days, Carnegie contracted pneumonia at the age of 83. He died peacefully on August 11, 1919, in the town of Lenox, Massachusetts. His remaining fortune of $30 million was donated to various charitable causes and the people in need. He was buried in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in New York, where his humble gravestone still stands. Although Carnegie's truly magnanimous life had come to an end, his legacy has continued to inspire a multitude of generations that succeeded him. Many consider him as the living embodiment of the much-fabled American dream. What's more, the reverberations of his philanthropic ventures can be felt and noticed even today, as the age-old Carnegie Foundations continue to keep his flame alive and kicking. So, how has Andrew Carnegie's story inspired you? Was it his perseverance and grit in his truly rags-to-riches tale? Or was it his foresight that led to shrewd investments that formed the foundation of his business empire? Or perhaps it was his generous giving that inspired generations of philanthropic efforts even decades after his death? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing. Thank you all. I will see you soon and have an excellent rest of your day.